He looked like he hadn't eaten in days, standing over the fallen elder with blood on his knuckles. But what happened next would leave an entire frontier town speechless. This is Narrative Odyssey, bringing you stories that grip your soul. His name was Sawyer Briggs, crouched behind wooden crates outside Murphy's trading post, his stomach grinding against his spine like two pieces of rough leather. The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street, and he could smell fresh bread from inside the store, a scent that made his empty belly clench with desperate hunger. His clothes hung loose on his thin frame, patched and repatched until they looked more like a quilt than proper garments. Through the grimy window, he watched the store owner, a thick-set man with cruel eyes, arguing with an elderly native man who stood with quiet dignity. Despite the verbal assault, the elder's weathered hands gripped a small leather pouch, his silver hair braided with traditional beads that caught the harsh sunlight streaming through the glass. "I told you people before. No trade with your kind," the store owner spat, his voice carrying through the thin walls. "Take your trinkets and get out before I call the sheriff." Sawyer's jaw tightened as he watched the elder's shoulders square with quiet pride. The old man's voice remained steady, speaking in accented English about needing medicine for his sick granddaughter, offering beautifully crafted items in exchange. But the store owner's face only grew redder with each word. Can you imagine the courage it takes to stand tall when the world pushes you down? Stay with Narrative Odyssey to find out what happens next. The boy had seen enough cruelty in his 16 years to recognize it instantly. He knew that look, the same expression he'd seen on the faces of men who kicked stray dogs just because they could. Something cold and sharp twisted in his chest as he watched the elder's dignity being stripped away piece by piece. But what Sawyer didn't know was that this moment would set in motion events that would shake the very foundations of the small frontier town, and that the choice he was about to make would echo through the tribal lands for generations to come. Sawyer's heart hammered against his ribs as he watched two more men enter the trading post, men he recognized as Clyde Harrove's hired hands. Their boots thundered across the wooden floor, and through the window, he could see them flanking the elderly native man like wolves, circling wounded prey. "You deaf old man," Clyde Harrove emerged from behind the counter, his meaty fists clenched at his sides. "Murphy here told you to leave. Maybe you need help understanding." The elder's voice remained calm, but Sawyer could see the tension in his weathered hands. My granddaughter is very sick. I only asked for medicine. These items are worth much more than what I need." Clyde laughed, a harsh sound that made Sawyer's skin crawl. "Worth something. This junk?" He snatched the leather pouch from the elder's hands and dumped its contents onto the counter. Beautiful beadwork scattered across the wooden surface, intricate patterns that spoke of hours of careful craftsmanship. But then Clyde did something that made Sawyer's blood turn to ice. He swept his arm across the counter, sending the precious items crashing to the floor, and brought his boot down hard on a delicate necklace that had probably taken months to create. The elder's composure finally cracked. A sound escaped his throat. Not quite a gasp, not quite a cry, but something that spoke of deep spiritual pain. In that moment, Sawyer saw his own reflection in the old man's eyes. The same helplessness, the same hunger, the same bone-deep knowledge that the world could be unspeakably cruel to those who had nothing. Sawyer's thin frame trembled as he pressed himself against the wall, every instinct screaming at him to run, to hide, to survive like he always had. He was just a scrawny kid with nothing to his name except the clothes on his back. What could he possibly do against 3 grown men? But as Clyde raised his hand toward the elder's face, something inside Sawyer snapped like a dry branch, and he found himself moving toward the door. Before his mind could catch up with his body, the door to Murphy's trading post burst open with such force that it slammed against the wall, rattling the glass windows. Sawyer stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, looking like a scarecrow that had come to life. His pale face was flushed with determination, and his hands shook slightly at his sides. But his voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade. "Leave him alone." The three men turned toward him with expressions, ranging from shock to amusement. Clyde Harrove's eyebrows shot up as he took in the boy's appearance. The threadbare clothes, the hollow cheeks, the desperate thinness that spoke of too many hungry nights. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Clyde's voice dripped with mock concern. "Boy, you look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks. Why don't you run along before you collapse?" Sawyer's legs felt like water beneath him, and his heart pounded so hard, he was sure everyone in the room could hear it. But he took another step forward, positioning himself between the elder and Clyde's hired men. The native elder looked at him with surprise, and something that might have been respect flickering in his dark eyes. "I said, leave him alone," Sawyer repeated, his voice stronger this time. Despite the way his whole body trembled, "He's done nothing wrong." One of Clyde's men, a burly fellow with arms like tree trunks, let out a harsh laugh. "Kid thinks he's some kind of hero. Maybe we should teach him what happens to heroes around here." The elder spoke softly, his weathered hand reaching towards Sawyer's shoulder. "Young one, this is not your fight. These men are dangerous." But Sawyer shrugged away from the gentle touch, his jaw set with stubborn determination. "No, sir, this is exactly my fight." His eyes never left Clyde's face as he continued speaking. "I've been hungry plenty of times. I know what it's like when nobody will help you, when they look at you like you're nothing, but I never had anybody stand up for me." Clyde's amusement faded, replaced by something darker. "Boy, you're making a very big mistake. Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" "Don't matter who you are," Sawyer replied, surprised by his own boldness. "What matters is what you're doing, and what you're doing is wrong." The room fell silent, except for the sound of breathing and the distant noise of the street outside. Sawyer could feel sweat trickling down his back, and his mouth had gone completely dry. But he held his ground. He thought about all the times he'd wanted someone, anyone, to step forward and help him when he was being pushed around or turned away from stores and restaurants. But what happened next would test every ounce of courage the young man possessed. Because Clyde Hargrove was not the kind of man who backed down from a fight, especially not when challenged by a half-starved boy who looked like he could barely stand upright. Clyde Hargrove's face transformed into something ugly and menacing as he stepped closer to Sawyer, his heavy boots echoing ominously on the wooden floor. The boy could smell the man's sour breath and see the network of broken blood vessels across his nose, signs of too many nights spent drinking away whatever conscience he might have once possessed. "You want to be a hero, boy?" Clyde's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Let me show you what happens to heroes in my town." His massive fist swung towards Sawyer's face with brutal force, but the boy had learned to be quick during his years on the streets. He ducked just in time, feeling the wind from the punch ruffle his hair. Clyde's momentum carried him forward, and he stumbled slightly, his face flushing red with embarrassment and rage. The elder stepped forward, his voice urgent. "Please, there is no need for violence. I will leave quietly." But Clyde was beyond reason now. His pride had been wounded in front of his men, and that was something he could never tolerate. He grabbed Sawyer by the front of his tattered shirt and lifted him off the ground with frightening ease. The boy's feet dangled helplessly as Clyde drew back his other fist. That's when something extraordinary happened. Sawyer, despite being outweighed by nearly 100 pounds and held completely helpless, looked Clyde straight in the eye and spoke with a calmness that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. "Go ahead, hit me, but that won't change what you are." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel, Clyde's fist trembled with barely contained fury, and for a moment, it seemed certain he would strike. But something in the boy's steady gaze gave him pause. There was no fear there anymore, just a quiet acceptance and a strength that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. The elder watched this exchange with growing amazement. In his 70 years, he had seen many acts of courage, but there was something different about this skinny white boy who had nothing to gain and everything to lose by standing up for a stranger. Clyde's grip on Sawyer's shirt tightened, and his voice became a low growl. "You think you're better than me, boy? You think your noble words mean something? You're nothing but street trash, and that's all you'll ever be." "Maybe," Sawyer replied quietly, "but at least I can sleep at night." The simple honesty of those words seemed to hit Clyde harder than any physical blow could have. His face went through a series of expressions: rage, confusion, and something that might have been shame. Before settling back into cold anger, one of his hired men shifted nervously near the door. "Boss, maybe we should just let them go. People are starting to gather outside." Indeed, curious faces had begun appearing at the windows, drawn by the commotion. Word traveled fast in a small frontier town, and already a small crowd was forming on the street, their voices creating an anxious murmur that seemed to press against the walls of the trading post. But Clyde Hargrove had never backed down from a fight in his life, and he wasn't about to start now, especially not in front of witnesses who would spread the story throughout the territory. Before nightfall, Clyde's fist came down like a hammer, but instead of connecting with Sawyer's face, it struck the elder's raised arm. The old man had stepped forward at the last second, absorbing the blow meant for the boy. The impact sent him staggering backward, his weathered face contorting with pain, but he remained standing with dignity intact. "Enough," the elder said firmly, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to fill the entire room. "Your fight is with me, not with this brave young man." Sawyer felt his feet touch the ground. As Clyde released his grip, the man's attention now fully focused on the native elder. The boy's legs nearly buckled beneath him, but he forced himself to stay upright, his mind racing with the realization that this kind stranger had just taken a blow meant for him. "Old man, you just made the biggest mistake of your worthless life." Clyde snarled, flexing his bruised knuckles. "Nobody interferes with my business in my town." But the elder stood his ground, and something had changed in his posture. The submissive, pleading man from moments before had been replaced by someone who carried himself like a leader, someone accustomed to respect and responsibility. His dark eyes held Clyde's gaze without flinching. "Your town?" the elder asked quietly. "This land has seen many who claim to own it. They all believed their time would last forever." The crowd outside had grown larger, and their murmurs were becoming more agitated. Through the window, Sawyer could see men removing their hats and women covering their mouths in shock. Word was spreading quickly that something serious was happening at Murphy's trading post. Clyde seemed to sense the shift in attention, and his anger grew more desperate. He grabbed the elder by the front of his traditional shirt, the fabric tearing slightly under his grip. "I don't care about your philosophy, old man. I care about respect, and you're going to give it to me." That's when Sawyer did something that surprised everyone, including himself. Despite his exhaustion, despite his fear, despite being outmatched in every conceivable way, he stepped forward and placed his thin hand on Clyde's massive arm. "Let him go," Sawyer said softly. "Please." The word please seemed to hang in the air like a prayer. There was no defiance in it, no challenge, just a simple human request from one person to another. For a moment, something flickered across Clyde's face, something that might have been his long-buried conscience trying to surface. But then Murphy, the store owner, spoke up from behind the counter. "Clyde, the sheriff's coming. I can see him down the street." The announcement changed everything. Clyde's face went through a rapid series of calculations, and Sawyer could practically see the man weighing his options. Being caught roughing up an old native man and a homeless boy in front of half the town would create problems. Even someone with Clyde's influence might struggle to overcome. But what none of them knew was that this confrontation had been witnessed by eyes other than those of the gathering townspeople, and that the consequences of this moment would reach far beyond anything a frontier sheriff could handle. Sheriff Coleman pushed through the crowd outside Murphy's trading post, his weathered face grim with the knowledge that any situation involving Clyde Hargrove rarely ended well. His hand rested on the butt of his revolver, not because he expected to use it, but because Clyde respected strength more than words. Inside the store, Clyde released his grip on the elder and took a step back, his face quickly rearranging itself into a mask of injured innocence. "Sheriff, thank goodness you're here. These two were causing trouble in Murphy's store." Sheriff Coleman's experienced eyes took in the scene quickly. The scattered beadwork on the floor, the elder's torn shirt, the boy's frightened but determined face, and Clyde's flushed complexion told a story that contradicted the merchant's words entirely. "That's so," the sheriff asked dryly. "Murphy, what happened here?" Murphy shifted uncomfortably behind his counter, his eyes darting between Clyde and the sheriff. Everyone in town knew about the business arrangements between the two men, and Murphy owed Clyde more money than he could repay in a lifetime. "Well, Sheriff, the old Indian came in wanting to trade, but we don't do business with their kind. When I asked him to leave, he got aggressive, and this boy here started making threats." Sawyer's mouth fell open in shock at the blatant lie, but before he could speak, the elder placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. The old man's eyes held a sadness that spoke of hearing such lies many times before. "Sheriff," the elder said quietly, "I came seeking medicine for my sick granddaughter. I offered fair trade. These men destroyed my goods and threatened violence. This young man showed courage by defending me when I could not defend myself." Sheriff Coleman studied the faces around him, his jaw working thoughtfully. He'd been keeping the peace in frontier towns long enough to recognize truth when he heard it. But he also knew the political realities of his position. Clyde Hargrove owned half the businesses in town and had the ear of important people in the territorial capital. "Boy," the sheriff addressed Sawyer directly, "you got anything to add to this story?" Sawyer's throat felt like sandpaper, but he forced the words out. "They were hurting him, Sheriff. All he wanted was medicine for his family. They knocked his things on the floor and broke them on purpose." The sheriff nodded slowly, then looked at the scattered beadwork. Even to his untrained eye, the craftsmanship was clearly valuable. The kind of intricate work that took months to complete. No one would destroy such items accidentally. "Clyde," the sheriff said carefully, "these folks seem to have a different version of events than you do." Clyde's face darkened, but he kept his voice level. "Sheriff, you know me. I'm a respected businessman in this community. Are you going to take the word of some homeless vagrant and an old Indian over mine?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a campfire, and everyone in the room understood its implications. This wasn't just about what had happened in the trading post. It was about power, privilege, and the kind of justice that existed in places where the law was still being written. Sheriff Coleman's hand tightened on his gun belt, and Sawyer could see the conflict playing out across the man's weathered features. But what the sheriff decided next would determine whether justice had any meaning in their small frontier town, and whether courage was rewarded or punished when it came from those who had nothing left to lose. Sheriff Coleman walked slowly around the scattered beadwork, his boots crunching softly on the broken pieces. The silence in the room stretched tight as a bowstring, and Sawyer could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Finally, the sheriff crouched down and picked up a partially intact necklace. examining the intricate patterns with genuine appreciation. "This is fine work," he said quietly, then looked up at the elder. "Your granddaughter made this?" The elder nodded, his voice heavy with emotion. "She is only 12, but her hands are gifted. This piece took her 3 months to complete. She hoped to trade it for the medicine that might save her life." Something shifted in Sheriff Coleman's expression, and when he stood up, his posture had changed. He faced Clyde directly, and his voice carried the authority of his badge when he spoke. "Clyde, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want the truth. Did you destroy this man's property?" Clyde's face flushed red, and his fists clenched at his sides. "Sheriff, I don't like your tone. Maybe you forgot who pays the taxes that fund your salary. Maybe you forgot that I took an oath to protect all the people in this territory, not just the ones with full pockets." The sheriff replied evenly. "Now, answer my question." The tension in the room was so thick, it seemed to press against the walls. Murphy cowered behind his counter, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Clyde's hired men shifted nervously, their hands moving instinctively toward their weapons, but not quite daring to draw them with the sheriff present. Sawyer watched in amazement as the elder stepped forward, his weathered hand extended toward Sheriff Coleman. "There is no need for this conflict to continue. I will leave peacefully and seek help elsewhere." But Sheriff Coleman shook his head. "No, sir, you won't. This is a matter of law now." He turned back to Clyde. "You're going to pay for the damaged goods, and you're going to apologize to this man and the boy." Clyde's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Like hell I am. Sheriff, you're making a mistake that's going to cost you your job." "Maybe," Coleman replied calmly. "But some things are worth the cost." The words seemed to electrify the air in the room. Through the windows, Sawyer could see the crowd outside growing larger, their faces pressed against the glass, as they tried to hear what was happening inside. He realized that this moment would be talked about in the town for years to come, regardless of how it ended. Clyde took a threatening step toward the sheriff, but Coleman's hand moved to his gun in a motion so smooth and practiced that it was clear he'd done it many times before. "I wouldn't, Clyde. Not in front of all these witnesses." But what happened next would change everything, because at that exact moment, a sound unlike anything anyone in the room had ever heard began to build in the distance, growing stronger with each passing second, until it seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The sound was thunder, but not from the sky. It was the thunder of hoofbeats, dozens of them, approaching from the eastern hills at a steady, purposeful pace. Everyone in Murphy's trading post froze as the rhythmic pounding grew closer, and through the windows, they could see the crowd outside, turning to look down the main street with expressions of wonder and growing concern. Sawyer pressed his face against the glass and felt his breath catch in his throat. Riders were emerging from the heat shimmer on the horizon, not in the chaotic rush of an attack, but in the disciplined formation of a people who had mastered the art of horsemanship over countless generations. They wore traditional clothing, mixed with practical frontier gear, their faces painted with symbols that spoke of serious intent. "Good Lord," Sheriff Coleman whispered, his gun forgotten as he stared at the approaching riders. "There must be 100 of them." The elder's face had transformed completely. Gone was the submissive old man who had been pleading for medicine. In his place stood someone who carried himself with the bearing of leadership, someone accustomed to respect and obedience. His dark eyes glittered with an emotion that might have been satisfaction. "Chief Royce Barrett," Clyde breathed, the color draining from his face, as recognition dawned. "You're Chief Royce Barrett." The elder smiled for the first time since entering the store, and there was something both gentle and terrible in that expression. "I am, and these are my people, come to see what has happened to their leader." The riders had reached the edge of town now, their horses moving in perfect synchronization as they arranged themselves in a wide semicircle around Murphy's trading post. The lead rider, a powerfully built man with steel grey hair and scars that spoke of many battles, dismounted and walked toward the store with the confident stride of a born warrior. Through the window, Sawyer could see him stop directly outside, his penetrating gaze taking in every detail of the scene inside. The man's hand rested casually on the handle of a knife at his belt, but there was nothing casual about the way he studied each face, visible through the glass. "That's Sterling Maddox," the chief said quietly, "my war leader. He has been watching from the hill since I entered your town. When I did not return as planned, he came looking for me." Clyde's face had gone completely white, and his hands trembled as the full implications of the situation became clear to him. This was no longer about bullying a helpless old man and a homeless boy. This was about having humiliated and threatened a tribal chief in front of witnesses. And word of such an insult would spread throughout the native communities faster than wildfire. Sheriff Coleman holstered his weapon and moved toward the door, his movements careful and deliberate. "Chief Barrett, I'm Sheriff Coleman. I'd like to speak with your war leader if that's acceptable." But before the chief could respond, Sterling Maddox pushed open the door and stepped into the store, his presence seeming to fill the entire space. His eyes found his chief first, noting the torn shirt and the bruise forming on the old man's arm, then shifted to survey the scattered beadwork on the floor. When his gaze finally settled on Sawyer, the boy felt as if he were being examined by someone who could see straight through to his soul. But there was no hostility in those dark eyes, only a deep curiosity and something that might have been approval. "Who is the one who stood with you?" Sterling asked his chief, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Chief Barrett placed his weathered hand on Sawyer's shoulder, and the boy could feel the strength and dignity that had sustained this man through 7 decades of hardship and leadership. "This young warrior stood between me and those who would do harm. When I was struck, he did not run. When I was threatened, he did not hide. He has the heart of our people, though his skin is different." Sterling Maddox studied Sawyer with intense scrutiny, taking in the boy's threadbare clothes, his hollow cheeks, and the defiant set of his jaw, despite his obvious fear. After a long moment, the war leader nodded slowly, as if some internal judgment had been reached. "You have no family?" Sterling asked directly. Sawyer's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "No, sir, nobody." "You have no home?" "No, sir. I sleep wherever I can find shelter." Sterling exchanged a meaningful look with Chief Barrett, and something passed between them that needed no words. The chief's eyes filled with a warmth that transformed his entire face as he turned back to Sawyer. "Then we offer you both. Our tribe has ancient laws about courage and honor. When someone risks their own safety to protect one of our elders, especially our chief, they are considered family. You defended not just an old man, but the father of our people." The words hit Sawyer like a physical blow, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. After years of sleeping in alleys and begging for scraps, after being turned away from every door and told he was worthless by people like Clyde Hargrove, someone was offering him a family. "I don't understand," Sawyer stammered. "You don't even know me." Chief Barrett smiled, and there was infinite kindness in his dark eyes. "I know that when evil showed its face, you did not look away. I know that when a stranger needed help, you gave it though you had nothing to gain. I know that you have the courage of a warrior in the heart of a protector. What more do I need to know?" Sterling stepped forward and placed his hand on Sawyer's other shoulder. "Our customs are clear. You are no longer alone in this world. You will learn our ways, contribute your strength to our people, and in return, you will have brothers and sisters who will never abandon you." Clyde Hargrove, who had been standing frozen throughout this exchange, suddenly found his voice. "Now wait just a minute. You can't just take that boy. There are laws about custody and proper procedures. Sterling's gaze shifted to Clyde with the coldness of winter wind, and his voice carried a quiet menace when he spoke. The boy chooses for himself. As for you, merchant, my chief tells me you destroyed sacred items made by a dying child's hands. You struck an elder who came seeking help for his granddaughter. These are insults that cannot be ignored. The war leader reached into a leather pouch at his belt and withdrew a handful of gold coins, more money than most people in the frontier town had ever seen in one place. He counted out an amount that would have been sufficient to buy everything in Murphy's store twice over and placed it on the counter. This pays for the destroyed goods with compensation for the insult offered to our people. Consider it a gift, because what you deserve and what you receive are very different things. Sheriff Coleman stepped forward, his voice carefully neutral. I think that settles the matter of damages. Chief Barrett, will there be any other consequences for what happened here today? The chief considered the question carefully, his eyes moving from Clyde's terrified face to the crowd of townspeople visible through the windows. Word of today's events will travel to every tribe between here and the Great Mountains. How this merchant is regarded by our people will depend on his actions from this day forward. We are not unreasonable, but we do not forget Clyde's face was ashen as the full implications of the chief's words sank in. Having the hostility of the tribal nations would make trade virtually impossible throughout the territory, and his business empire would crumble within months. Chief Barrett turned back to Sawyer, and his voice became gentle again. The choice is yours, young warrior. You can stay in this place where you have suffered, or you can come with us and discover what family truly means. Sawyer looked around the trading post one last time, taking in the scattered remains of the beautiful beadwork, Clyde's defeated posture, and the sheriff's approving nod. Then he looked into the chief's kind eyes and saw something he had never seen directed at him before: unconditional acceptance. I choose family, Sawyer said firmly, and for the first time in years, he felt truly safe. As they prepared to leave, Sterling leaned close to Sawyer's ear. There is something else you should know, young brother. The sick granddaughter, whose beadwork was destroyed, she recovered 3 days ago. The chief's journey to town was never about medicine. It was about testing the hearts of the people who live here. You are the only one who passed. Outside, the 100 warriors waited patiently as their chief emerged from the trading post, with his newest adopted son walking proudly beside him. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street, and the townspeople watched in respectful silence as Sawyer mounted the horse that Sterling offered him. As they rode toward the eastern hills, Sawyer looked back once at the frontier town that had never wanted him. He felt no bitterness, only gratitude for the harsh lessons that had prepared him to recognize genuine kindness when it finally appeared. Behind him, Clyde Hargrove stood in the doorway of Murphy's trading post, a broken man who had learned too late that true wealth cannot be measured in gold or property, but in the respect and loyalty of those who matter most. The boy who had entered that morning as nobody became a son, a brother, and a member of a people who valued courage above all other virtues. And in the tribal lands where he would spend the rest of his life, the story of his stand against injustice would be told around countless fires, inspiring generations of young warriors to understand that heroism has nothing to do with size or strength, but everything to do with the willingness to do what is right when everything is at stake. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where honor and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe to Narrative Odyssey and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to Narrative Odyssey.